EA Games.
Challenge everything.
In the modern world, great leaders resolve their conflicts with words. Death Launcher. Carbon bombing. Tomahawk missiles.
Hello, and welcome, General.
Fire at will. Enemy in perimeter. Range 200. They're everywhere.
Command & Conquer Generals is a
Watch the left.
unique title for the Command & Conquer series, and just sort of in general.
Nice shot.
It's hard to really introduce this game without having to talk about the associated political background under which it was created, influenced, and subsequently released.
I'm hit.
Suffice to say that there are three sides to this story: the US, the GLA or terrorists, and the Chinese. The US is probably the only one that's really talked about in a positive light, by the game at least, and even still, it's safe to say that all sides are characterizations,
Maintain formation.
or caricaturizations,
Reload.
and just stereotypes kind of taken to an extreme. None of this is good, by the way, and, well,
Range 200.
I don't really care for the political views of anybody who's watching this. There are problems with this game, and with the units, the voices, and so on. And let's just leave it at that, because 2003 was a shitty time, and I think there's a lot of retrospective that can be done on this game specifically.
I'm hit.
That being said, it is nice that there's this sort of interactive start screen.
General, the world's largest and most organized terrorist group, known as the Global Liberation Army, has taken control of a chemical weapons plant in the Mazar DMZ. A small Ranger strike team has been sent to destroy the factory. You have been chosen for the command.
Alpha here. ETA 30 seconds. Target coordinates Gamma Niner. Taking fire from Mobile AAA. Alpha squad is down. We are option 2. Repeat, option 2. Roger. Beta team en route. I'm hit. LZ is hot. Engage. All clear, Beta. It's a go.
So right away we have a lot to talk about. First off, the game can actually be run in a modern resolution,
Heading out.
but unfortunately, going into the options in-game actually messes with that if you try to change anything. You have to cancel if you ever go into the options menu. If you do make a change, it basically changes the resolution back to a 800 by 600, which sucks and is annoying. And you have to change a text file in order to get back your original quote-unquote resolution.
Taking fire! Request reinforcement!
Having the increased resolution does mess with some of the in-game cutscenes, and I'm not quite sure why one of those cutscenes was very laggy, but that's rare in terms of overall in the game.
Need a point, man? Always prepared.
A lot of these units we're also not going to see for quite some time, just because despite the training mission being the USA units, we don't actually play the USA faction until the third campaign in the game.
Looks like a good run.
Enemy forces on the move.
Roger that. Come on, rip it up. Whoa.
Your training mission is pretty bog standard. Start out with a couple of units, you get shown a different unit, special abilities come into play, barracks shows up, etc. There are obvious differences between this game and prior games in the Command & Conquer lineage, namely that every unit appears to have special abilities, which is very different and a large step away from the prior entries. For vehicles in the US side, this usually devolves to drones. So they can have battle drones or UAV drones. Battle drones attack and repair. UAV drones basically provide line of sight and detection.
Good run.
We'll get into this a little bit more once we get to the USA campaign. But the standard fare applies. There are units that can now carry other units and also have those units shoot, which is a departure from your typical amphibious transport that we saw in previous games. The battle bus is probably a good example of that being a returning feature from Yuri's Revenge.
Tank responding.
Additionally, the bases that are built with builder units, so very similar to Warcraft 3, etc. It's no longer simply a bar and it's built in a nebulous void.
Upgrade complete.
So all three factions have their own different builder units, and these builder units perform slightly differently from each other. There's also special abilities such as being able to reveal parts on the map, although in this instance it's not too important.
Good job. The base is liberated. Now let's build a strong battle force. When your forces are ready, General, proceed to this GLA mountain hideout and destroy their secret biolab.
Resources on the map are also finite, in a very different departure from previous games. Now, while Tiberium Dawn might have had very limited amounts of Tiberium, and games like Red Alert and Red Alert 2, while having minerals could sometimes be on the lower side, they almost always had the Tiberium trees or the ore mining entries. That is no longer the case. So getting proper funding is something to really pay attention to and make sure that your efficiency is high.
Humvee here, got room for 5. Humvee here, got room for 5. Got room for 5. How about a lift?
Now, I'm trying to get to see if there's any special lines that might show up, but I believe this is an expansion thing, that or just unused audio.
Protecting our people.
But we'll be able to see that at a later date. A nice inclusion as well is when selecting a unit, you can see on the bottom right all of the upgrades that they do or do not have. and more specifically, all the upgrades they can have. So you can kind of, at a glance, get an idea or a sense of what unit has what or can get what in the future. Unfortunately, the upgrades that a unit can have are not blocked out based on availability. So many of these upgrades we will not see for a very long time, just because they won't show up for that long.
Fire it up. Orders, General. At the wheel.
Now, there's a couple of things that can be gleaned on from interviews, but also just from interactions or how the units are and what you should generally expect from the factions.
Confirmed.
The US, as you might expect, is a higher technology group, not only because of the drones that they have, but also the different types of weaponry that they employ.
Stinger 2 is down. Airstrike in 10 seconds.
Now, with this higher tech, it does mean that US forces are generally more expensive than their opposing faction counterparts.
Go for it. Looks like a good run.
The idea in interviews was that or at least in one of the interviews I watched at the time, was that the Americans are supposed to be a sort of counterattack group. They heal quickly or heal constantly, but you shouldn't expect to field very many of them. So they can kind of get swamped out by the Chinese faction, as you might expect being a stereotype, and also just having quote-unquote precision strike ability. That's half true, but we'll get into it later. Another returning feature is the ability to garrison buildings.
Paratroopers take cover in civilian buildings.
Chew on these.
There's actually an even better depiction of attacking buildings and garrisoning them, but for some reason they didn't want to show it off in the training mission.
Rip it up.
Garrisoning buildings is very much like Red Alert 2, the only difference being that you now can garrison all sorts of different infantry types in buildings. So no longer is it limited specifically to your basic machine gun infantry.
Let's get in there. Entering the structure. Heading out. Got room for fire. How about a lift?
As mentioned previously as well, you can garrison certain units in certain vehicles, and they also confer their abilities to said vehicle.
We can fire through the window.
This makes certain combinations a lot better than just a stock unit, and we'll get to explore that a little bit further down the line.
Looks like a good run. Oh yeah.
Now, as mentioned, because the Americans are more expensive, they typically field less units. There's very much a high risk reward in the types of attacks that you do, or counterattacks, or what have you.
You want some of this? Break it loose.
Contact closing. Enemy technicals on the move.
On the other hand, the GLA forces that we are pitted against will typically be the sort of, I guess, sneakier type.
Fire at will.
How about a lift? Ready for action.
They won't show themselves too often. When they do, their strikes are pretty devastating. They use a lot of explosives. There's no care for keeping the units intact or alive. And Again, just kind of a lot of subversion and sneaky camouflage tactics.
The building is captured, sir.
China, which we'll see after this video, as we jump straight into their campaign, they employ massive numbers and have more of a use towards deadlier weaponry, we'll say. Brute force is typically more the idea for them.
Stand by. Enemy perimeter breach. Air Force, begin your attack run.
I have experience.
Over there? How about a lift? You want some of this?
One nice separator between the American forces and others is that whenever a vehicle has several experience bars, dies, the pilot, quote-unquote, ejects. And that pilot is able to essentially give its experience to any unit it can re-enter.
Chew on me! This should be fun. Rip it up! Looks like a good run.
There's also quite a heavy emphasis of like Michael Bay in all the cutscenes that we've seen so far, and that trend will continue.
You want some of this? Whoa!
Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this training mission, and I hope to see you in further videos.
General, our strike was successful. You are ready for a full battlefield command.
Unit lost.